Good morning, everybody. I'm Shannon Derejo from Creamer Media. Welcome to our webinar hosted in partnership with the Future Minerals Forum, where a panel will speak about the Future Minerals Forum and the Africa Minerals Strategy Group to unpack how African nations can enhance value creation while maintaining responsible mineral supply chains, as well as the policies and frameworks that have been effective in promoting responsible mining practices. Before we get started, please be aware that we've enabled the Q&A function, so please post any questions into the Q&A box. You'll find this on the panel at the bottom of your screen. To encourage interaction, we've also enabled the chat function, so you can network with the panelists and each other via the chat box. You'll also find this at the bottom of your screen. Please do not, however, post any questions in the chat box, as we may miss them. Post them into the Q&A instead. Please be aware we are recording this webinar and we'll be sending the recording to you when it's available. We are also streaming the webinar live to YouTube and we'll share the link in the chat once it's available. I'll hand over now to our facilitator, Aldo Panini from the Future Minerals Forum to begin the proceedings. Over to you, Aldo.
Thank you very much, Shannon, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We have some 337 people joining this call, so thank you to all of those who are taking the time. You are scattered around the world, which means to us that this is going to be an interesting conversation with a broad audience to bear in mind. Firstly, I would like to introduce our panelists, and then I'll introduce myself. His Excellency Moses Ngadu, Secretary General of the Africa Minerals Strategy Group. Welcome, Moses. And also Mthunjane, Chief Executive Officer of the Minerals Council of South Africa. Good morning, Zilla.
Good morning, Aldo, and thanks for having me.
My name, as you can see on your screen, is Aldo Panini. I am the Director of Strategy, Program and Content for the Future Minerals Forum. Now, this conversation is a really interesting one from my perspective because it speaks to a partnership that's emerged over the last short while between the Future Minerals Forum and Africa. And today we're going to unpack what that means. Perhaps before we continue, just to give you a brief summary of what the Future Minerals Forum is and what it seeks to achieve. The forum was established in 2021. It was first held in January 2022 in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, with a big ambition, which is to shape the future of minerals. In the few years that have followed, this has become a significant global conversation. Held last in January 2025, we brought together 89 governments, mainly at ministerial or vice ministerial level, plus 18,000 participants, of which some 300 were CEOs and senior executives from the world's leading mining companies, as well as downstream and customer groups. So we've very much established ourselves as a must-go-to conversation. We are not only an event, although we have a ministerial roundtable and a forum, we aspire to be much more than that. And part of the reason why we're excited to be part of this conversation is we are engaging with a continent that's vital to the future supply of minerals, minerals for development, minerals for the AI revolution, minerals for the energy transition, and nowadays also minerals for security. And so it's a vital topic, and I thank Creamer Media for the opportunity to have this conversation. The last thing I'd say is that one of the key objectives of the Future Minerals Forum is to provide a platform to deliver a voice for supply countries in this vital global conversation. So we bring together the supply world, we bring together the customer world, we bring together governments, and we bring together industry. And together, our objective is that they will define areas of common interest and, more importantly, practical action to deliver the minerals, whether the minerals the world needs, whether it be on the funding side, and much more needs to be done there, and whether it's on the policy side, and obviously more needs to be done there. That's the Future Minerals Forum. I would like to open up the conversation by posing the question, the topic of the webinar. Is Africa's voice finally being heard? And I would welcome Moses and Mzila to try and answer that question. Over to you, Moses.
Thank you, Aldo. I think that's a very important question. And before I respond, I'd like to appreciate and thank the ministers and senior government representatives and our friends from the private sector who are joining this webinar today as we continue these conversations. I would say yes, Africa's voice is being heard, but it's also not being listened to. When you look at what Africa is pushing for, which is essentially mineral value addition and becoming a processing hub for critical minerals, we're looking at it as a matter of global supply chain security. We know that global critical mineral supply chains are highly concentrated, with mining and especially refining dominated by a few regions. This exposes our markets to geopolitical risks, resource nationalism, and supply disruptions. So as Africa, mineral value addition is considered a matter of supply chain security. I would like to thank the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and especially the Future Minerals Forum for this strategic partnership with Africa that's based on mutual respect and shared goals. I am pleased, and one of the reasons why I said Africa's voice is being finally heard is that 2 out of 3 FMF initiatives are led by African countries. That's the Initiative on Responsible Supply that's chaired by the Federal Republic of Nigeria, as well as the Initiative of Centers of Excellence that's chaired by the Kingdom of Morocco. Well, we need to do more to ensure that this voice is not only heard, but that Africa is taking its rightful place in the geopolitical mineral landscape, especially in shaping the critical minerals agenda. We all know that without Africa's critical minerals, the world cannot achieve the energy transition, let alone be able to put in place the digital infrastructure. And even when you look at defense technologies, it is for this reason that the Africa Mineral Strategy Group was established on the sidelines of the 3rd Future Minerals Forum on the 9th January 2024. And this was born out of an urgent need in strategic interest to ensure that we are facilitating international cooperation in the minerals and mining sector among African countries, but also working closely with interested nations and strategic partners to foster cooperation in the critical minerals development. Well, Africa is endowed generously with the critical minerals and rare earth elements that are essential for our future economic growth and prosperity. However, we have a historical pattern of exporting predominantly as raw materials, which sacrifices value-added opportunities that could boost industrialization and socioeconomic growth domestically. However, despite these obstacles that are historical in nature, but also with the current market dynamics, Africa's mineral wealth is a powerful resource that could ensure that the world fosters sustainable development. We know that the global economic growth and prosperity really relies on supply of critical minerals. And as it has been assured or estimated for that matter, By 2050, some of the critical minerals need to grow by up to 75% times their 2020 levels. So the African Mineral Strategy Group is built around a transformative goal of promoting exploration, extraction, production, local beneficiation of value addition and commercialization, but to ensure that we have a secure, sustainable, transparent, and secure supply of critical minerals while protecting our environment and improving the quality of life of Africa's populace. I'd like to emphasize that the issue of a sustainable, transparent, and secure supply of minerals is very important to MSG because we know that the global economy is undergoing a seismic shift. We know the energy transition, digitalization, and defense technologies are fueling a global surge and insatiable demand for critical minerals and rare earth elements. So to achieve this, MSG laid out strategic objectives around collaboration, resource sharing, joint investment opportunities, capacity building, technology advancement, and strategic partnerships. We are cognizant of the fact that there are key enablers that are required to unlock the potential of Africa's vast minerals, but also to enable us to ensure a sustainable, transparent, and secure supply of critical minerals. We are working very closely with FMF and our strategic partners, together with our member states and the private sector, to ensure that we have policy alignment, to ensure we have access to finance, affordable finance on the continent, to ensure that transparent supply chains are very important, but we need infrastructure development, capacity building, and new technologies. So MSG is uniquely positioned to enhance the coordination and collaboration in these areas. We know that we require mineral exploration to be able to unlock Africa's natural capital by investing in exploring its rich mineral reserves to identify and enhance potential reserves that are required for economic development. We need to build resilient and responsible local value chains and establishing processing hubs, especially for critical minerals, through partnerships with governments and private sector. So mineral value addition is very important. We also need to ensure that there is traceability and responsible supply of minerals, thereby building societal trust. We, as MSG, launched last year the Africa Responsible Mineral Sourcing Initiative on the sidelines of the Dubai Precious Metals Conference. And this year, we also launched the MSG blockchain platform for traceability called Madini, and the Africa Mineral Token, which is a utility token that's going to be able to be used to ensure that we have traceability on the continent. A key point that MSG is doing is how do we leverage blockchain, AI, cryptocurrency, and data science to be able to monetize Africa's critical minerals by tokenizing them as real-world assets so we can attract global investment, but also access to global financial markets. McKinsey and Boston Consulting Group did issue a report last year which saying that the global market for tokenized assets could reach about $16 trillion by 2030. And this is driven by the adoption of blockchain technologies. So as MSG, this is one of the areas that we are leveraging, as well as, of course, supporting the global energy transition, where with our critical minerals, we would like to contribute to that. We know for sure that capacity building is a requirement, and as a result, MSG is now implementing several strategic initiatives, which I would like to highlight, the first being policy and advocacy dialogues, because we need to foster these conversations. I'd like to thank FMF and Creamer Media for putting together this important and timely webinar, where we are continuing these conversations, these dialogues, so we can continue to foster collaboration, but also gather critical mass of best practices and knowledge around responsible mineral exploitation, but also the ensuring that Africa can provide its share to the global critical minerals market. We
Moses,
know
I'd
that.
like to just before you continue, Moses, I'd like to come back on some of these topics in a bit more depth, if that's okay with you. Before doing so, I'd like to sort of bring Mzila into the conversation. And Mzila, posing the question, the topic of discussion today is Africa's voice finally being heard.
Thanks, Elder, and I think really appreciate this opportunity to have this conversation and to share our thoughts with such a wide audience. I would say yes, you know, and I think it's important that we first understand that I guess the conversation so far around critical minerals, you know, the continent of Africa has always been in the background when it comes to minerals and supply of minerals to the world. And there's been a modus operandi in terms of how those minerals have been supplied to the rest of the world. But it has really been without a voice of Africa in as far as expressing what Africa benefits and how Africa benefits from those minerals. And what we've seen today and more recently with the conversation specifically on critical minerals is that we're perhaps seeing a continuation of that with what we've been seeing as the definition of critical minerals, which definitions have largely been from what we refer to as the global north. And that it then gave rise to, you know, when it became evident in as far as where the source of these minerals will come from, what critical is and to who. And as a result, I think with Africa being at the center of that supply chain and the origin of that supply chain of critical minerals, then Africa had to really ask itself, you know, these minerals are going to be required for the globe. They're being defined as critical, but is that meaning of critical the same from a demand side as it is from a supply side? And I think this is where Africa's voice has really begun to emerge in as far as taking a step back and taking a firm stance in terms of saying what is critical to you may not necessarily be critical to me. Contrasting global north as you and global south as me. And as a result, what has come out of that is that a lot of African countries which are going to be the source of these minerals, as well as other countries, have begun to define for themselves what critical minerals are, which minerals will be part of the list of critical minerals. And if I can use South Africa as an example, you know, what is critical to South Africa converges with what is critical to other countries, but there are also some very unique minerals that are important. And what has come out of the exercise that South Africa has conducted, and I can say this with confidence because we've been working closely with the DMPR in defining the National Critical Mineral Strategy. The methodologies used were to look at today as we sit, what is critical for South Africa. And it has to do with, you know, both social and economic as well as environmental considerations. And so you shouldn't be surprised that if coal is amongst the top 10 critical minerals. And it is through this definition of what critical is from the perspective of the supplier that we're beginning to see and to hear a lot of what Africa's voice is in this landscape on critical minerals. alongside with that has been the expression of the development needs of the continent. And this is now beginning to define clearly, what Africa expects to get and to achieve from the extraction of these minerals. Now, how this development expectation has been expressed has been, amongst others, through, supply restrictions in terms of enabling beneficiation. Now, how I've kind of interpreted that is that I think it is to be expected that we need to shift away from the past where it was dig and ship, but more towards more value added to as far a degree as possible, as in on the continent. But in essence, what that is conveying as a key message out of the Voice of Africa is that Africa needs to ensure that it maximizes the benefit from its minerals, and that the minerals extraction contribute to the development needs of Africa across many dimensions, be it infrastructure, human capital development. There's a huge conversation right now about the need for energy in order to enable this beneficiation. And so I think we're going to hear more of Africa's voice as there's clarity on the goals and objectives of Africa in this current conversation, in as far as its development needs are concerned, because that's going to be a very important starting point, and a springboard for Africa as well to be able to then also embark confidently on this energy transition. And so and I think it's a very important voice to be present in this conversation, not merely for the supply of these minerals, but I think for the investment opportunities that it provides for the world. If you look at trends in as far as investments are concerned, certainly Africa, given its demographics, is providing a huge opportunity for investment. If you look at where the advanced world is and where we are in the emerging markets, and so I think it's an important voice to listen to, as Moses had said. So and platforms like these are really providing for that opportunity for this voice to carry over. But it is important that we participate with clarity of objectives, with specificity of goals in terms of what we want to achieve, and really provide for an opportunity and an environment on the continent for this investment to flow and for these benefits to come out from the exploitation of our minerals.
Thank you very much, Mzila. Maybe just a quick reflection on these comments before handing back to Moses. And what we appear to be in the cusp of, and this became evident in the last few Future Minerals Forum conversations, is that we are not only on the cusp of a new minerals age globally, but that this new minerals age could enable, and I'm not being flippant here, could enable a new age of development for continents such as Africa and other supply regions. And what that translates to is mining, value-adding jobs and other benefits. So with that in mind, Moses, what does this collaboration with the Future Minerals Forum look like in practice? And how can that collaboration be leveraged to deliver on these big ambitions? And what are your priorities in that partnership?
Yeah, thank you, Aldo and Mozilla for putting the context. I think one of the greater conversations is the issue of critical minerals and the definition. Looking at our relationship and work around with FMF, I think one of the key things that we are looking at is the issue of stronger collaboration, so that we leverage the platform of FMF to be able to attract investments on the continent, as Mozilla had highlighted, but also to be able to build the issue of local value chains and then looking at what the work we are supposed to be doing this year. One of it is being able to build, to develop business cases for funding, because this is something that is very important for Africa to be able to see how do we align our regulatory frameworks to ensure that the private sector is confident enough to be able to invest in the continent. How do we be able to attract more financing to minerals exploration so that we de-risk the global supply chain? We're looking as well on how to leverage the MSG Madini blockchain platform and its utility token to implement a pilot project in the Copper Belt on traceability and certification with FMF. And then, of course, we need to ensure that our member states continue to contribute experts towards the creation of networks of centers of excellence across the continent. With FMF, one of the key things that is really important is how do we take these conversations out of Riyadh to be able to domesticate them on the continent. And I'm happy that together with FMF, we are working on hosting the first FMF in Africa, a special meeting on how Africa can leverage the second scramble for its critical minerals, which is the new age of minerals, to be able to ensure that collaboration is key to addressing the critical mineral supply challenges, achieving the energy transition, as well as creating resilient and responsible supply chains, and being able to build trust among stakeholders. I believe that when we go this way, we should be able to do this. And I would like to invite everyone that's on this webinar to join in July. We'll be co-organizing with FMF the first FMF Africa special meeting in Uganda. When it comes down to looking ahead, we as MSG are trying to ensure that we prioritize certain things that are key levers that will be able to unlock the great mineral potential on the continent. And the first being that we need to ensure that we have responsible mining as well as sourcing and supply of our minerals. So we'll be pushing through the Africa Responsible Mineral Sourcing Initiative to unite countries, industry, and civil society to build Africa's responsible mineral sourcing ecosystem. We've been discussing our approach is around building an ecosystem so that we have everybody involved in the value chain, but also be able to participate. We will also be leveraging the blockchain technology through our Madini platform and our Africa Mineral Token, ensuring that we have traceability and responsible supply chains across the continent. And the tokenization is another opportunity for which our countries can be able to leverage their critical mineral reserves to mobilize funding for critical things such as mineral exploration, critical infrastructure development, as Mozilla was talking about energy needs, things such as capacity building and talent development. They are all very critical elements that we are going to be pursuing over the year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moses. Now, Mzila, the work that the African Mineral Strategy Group has done in its short life, it's 1 year old, that it turned one in January, bringing together, correct me if I'm wrong, Moses, 15 or 16 governments from the African continent. South Africa being a country with such a rich mining heritage, Mzila, how could it leverage that history and its policy frameworks? How could it contribute to this important discussion? And how could the experience of South Africa, particularly the positive developments, be scaled up across the continent?
Thanks, Aldo, for that question. And I think for me, it ties back to the previous question around this new minerals age. And I don't know if the audience it becomes equally excited about the implications of that as I have been, having been in the mining industry for more than 30 years. It's certainly couldn't be any other industry I'd like to find myself in right now. Your question talks to a very important topic, which was covered at FMF and one or two other conferences that I attended recently, which is around regionalization. But I think more importantly, looking at, frankly, the scramble for Africa, the need for better coordination through the various regions in Africa, taking advantage of this concept of comparative advantage rather than competitive advantage. And from your question, given, I think, the history of mining in South Africa, the strength of its institutional knowledge and capability in mining, that's a huge comparative advantage that we have. I mean, as a Minerals Council, we have about 72 members that participate in more than between 15 and 20 commodities, all within the country of South Africa, which shows you the mineral endowment. Gold has been mined for more than 100 years. We've seen a pickup in many other non-gold commodities. And in fact, you speak of how the continent can leverage this. We've seen a huge export of South Africa's capabilities in terms of human capital, research from entities like Mintech, CSR, to many parts of the world, including in Saudi, who I believe, the mineral legislation was also developed on the back of South Africa's own mineral legislation. So I think as a country, we have a lot to offer the continent. But for the continent to get the full benefit of that, it's going to be important that whether we start within SADC or as a contribution that we make through the African Union, that I think the whole continent begins to think much bigger than just the individual countries. By way of example, if you look at a commodity like platinum group metals, South Africa and Zimbabwe are the two dominating countries. And we sitting perhaps with some excess refining and smelting capacity. Does it make sense for Zimbabwe to develop the same? Or is there an arrangement that can be made between the two countries for elevating or maintaining level of production, but ensuring that we're getting the full benefit of that, of those commodities in terms of existing beneficiation capacity? And any other capacity that is provided is additional rather than competitive. And those are capabilities that South Africa has that it can provide to the rest of the continent. So the whole concept of taking a regional perspective on the future development of the continent is one that I believe will maximize the opportunities and will enable for some of these comparative advantage to bear fruit, not only for South Africa, but also for the other countries as well.
Thank you, Mzila. Moses, before I come back to you, maybe I could just take a moment to provide a little bit of context on the work that's been generated out of the Future Minerals Forum. Moses referred to a series of initiatives. And one of the objectives of this forum is to drive practical action on mineral supply and leveraging the governments that are coming together in Riyadh and soon in Africa, as well as the corporate world, to help define that action. And on the one hand, so one of our initiatives relates to the development of a critical minerals framework, an international critical minerals framework, where countries aim to find common ground, if I could put it that way, to deliver the supply required for not just the energy transition, but also, as we mentioned earlier, the AI revolution, security, and above all, development. And so this framework covers things such as policy, investment, talent development, geology, technology, as key enablers. The other piece of work that we're doing is around building capacity, as Moses alluded to, and we're aiming to do that through the creation of a network of centers of excellence. And why this is important in the African context is because we have recently announced the formation of 3 center of excellence hubs. Now, these are physical and virtual centers of excellence. One will tackle talent development, a key challenge for an opportunity for the sector. And the aim is to have that located in Southern Africa, particularly in South Africa. Another will focus on sustainability, likely to be the hub to be in Morocco, where there's strong capabilities, and an innovation technology hub in Riyadh. Now, these hubs aim to then form a web of knowledge across not just Africa, but also between Africa and the rest of the world. So this is where the whole notion of Africa's voice being heard starts to become real. A third pillar of the work we're doing, a third initiative, relates to sustainability, and Moses alluded to this as well. And the point to make there is, in a world of that seeks to produce minerals more responsibly, and there are a range of standards that gear towards improving performance, how do supply countries embark on that journey in a way that enables them to prosper? And how can their local realities be taken into account in the shaping of these standards, so that countries are able to get on that journey and be helped along rather than, in some cases, penalized? So with that in mind, I sort of wanted to contextualize there, Moses, because a lot of the work that you're doing through the AMSG, and no doubt Zilla through the South African Minerals Council, dovetails neatly into these three priorities. So perhaps back to you, Moses, to tell us a little bit more about this focus on traceability and transparency in particular, why you're going down that route, and what work has already been done. You've made some mention of platforms, but why is it important in particular at this time?
Yeah, when you look at some of the key challenges in terms of attracting investment, but also in terms of getting fair market value for African minerals in most global markets, has been the issue of standards around responsible supply chain based on the OECD guidance. And then when you also look at some of the challenges that we're facing around the issue of environmental protection within the communities, host communities benefiting from their minerals. The largest number of mining on the continent is happening around artisanal and small-scale miners. So how do we address some of these challenges, and as well in terms of how do we de-risk projects in terms of ESG? How do we ensure that governments are putting out policies, regulators are supporting the environment? So to us, traceability is good business. Traceability is good policy. And we would like to make sure that we create, if you look at some of the challenges that we have on the continent, is the issue of traceability infrastructure. The systems and infrastructure for traceability are missing. even when it comes to the different challenges faced by the different actors. We now are living in a market on the consumer side that is very concerned about the effect of their choices on what the minerals are contributing to in cases of human rights, cases of conflict minerals. So MSG through the Madini protocol or blockchain platform is launched a platform that we would like to address the issue of traceability and responsible supply chains. We know that with technology, with blockchain technology, we can be able to address some of the issues of illegal mining and smuggling for that matter, cross-border trade. We can be able to address the issue of corruption and fraud. We can be able to ensure of transparency, because when we have a transparent supply chain, it's easy to attract investment, but also it's easy to trace the provenance of these minerals or the source of origin. This has always been a challenge. Mozilla will agree with me that very few African countries can have a certificate of origin of their minerals when it reaches the market points or the market hubs, because of the issue of tracing where they are, but also addressing the issue of communities as well as the other challenges. So with this platform, which will come along with the issue of certification, we would like to ensure that we pilot first with FMF, but also I'm happy to note that the MSG Ministerial Steering Committee approved the platform for use in MSG countries. Now we're working with our private sector forum and key players to ensure that we co-create, a platform that is based on, as Aldo said, local realities, but is also very inclusive to the artisanal and small-scale miners, especially when it comes down to cost. Yeah. And this is all, to ensure that we achieve our responsible sourcing initiative as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moses. Ms. Mzila, back to you.
Yeah.
In order to succeed in achieving Africa's objectives, partnerships are fundamental. And so can you tell us a little bit about how you see the role of public-private partnerships in advancing the responsible supply of minerals, and what practical actions, what practical steps could be taken in that?
Wow, I hope we have enough time for that. But and where I want to start in responding to that question is the question you asked earlier around this new minerals age that will enable significant development. And the way that I've thought about this previously is how this new minerals age is going to be a platform for unprecedented innovation and collaboration. And at the time I was thinking about from a South African perspective, but with my exposure now to platforms like FMF and other conferences, it's going to be a global phenomenon. And some of the things that we can expect, coming back to your question now, is the innovation around how we partner and collaborate as different players in different sectors. Because the kind of opportunities that will be triggered, and I like you use the word catalyzed by mining, are significant. And by way of example, there's a concept now that we're working on with an institution called AFIDA around mining-enabled infrastructure, where in a location where there's a presence of a cluster of mines, that provides an economic activity which can help government raise financing for the provision of infrastructure, not only for the benefit of mining, but for the benefit of community. So, we can foresee a future where mines will no longer be established for ongoing and continued dependency, but rather where mines can be established in order to catalyze future cities and future towns. Because, the other aspect that will come through is how we need to also think holistically and over a long term around the development of mining. That, as I think Moses had made the point, mining has a definite start and a definite end. And how do we reinvest the revenues that we generate from that? So the kind of collaboration that needs to be designed into the implementation or into the construction and development of mining for future livelihoods once mining is no longer taking place is going to be a very important inclusion in mine development. The other innovation is that in South Africa particularly, we've seen how mining has played a huge role in employment creation, but largely on the semi to low skilled end. But mining is now adopting new technologies and new innovations. And I think given the amount of mining that is expected on the continent, mining is going to be a huge catalyst as well for the development of the new skills and innovation that we're seeing in many other sectors. And so these types of innovations in themselves will provide for collaboration, firstly, amongst mining companies where they exist in a cluster, but between the mining sector and other sectors such as in infrastructure, energy. We're seeing how, for instance, in South Africa, the mining industry has been the largest investor in renewable energy. Whilst you may say in the first instance, given the challenges that Eskom has been experiencing, it was in the first instance a risk response strategy. At the end of the day, it's also given the opportunity and the context that we find ourselves in, it's a huge play in terms of reduction of carbon emissions and beginning that energy transition that is important. Another example of how we've seen largely private sector participation as the preferred expression in South Africa has been, I think, how with policy reforms, space is now being made and provided for private sector to participate in enabling government to provide some of the services that it has not been able to in the past on the logistics side. And we're also seeing that coming through as well in terms of the supply of water infrastructure. Now, from a mining perspective, these are operating costs because they're services that we would need ordinarily in the course of running our mines. But from a financing perspective, it provides for security of cash flows and the ability to leverage that tax revenue that government is getting from the mines to be able to raise the funding necessary to then provide for infrastructure financing. So those would be the examples I could share in terms of the kind of collaboration we can expect. And I think there'll be many more such examples to come.
Thanks very much, Nzila. As you were speaking, and I'm mindful of time, we're already almost past our allocated slot, but I'd like to open up for questions from the subscribers. But before I do that, listening to both of you, what's standing out for me is that we're talking here about action, and that Africa is taking steps towards addressing key challenges and grasping the opportunity that this new minerals age is presenting. The train is at the station. Africa seems to be keen to get on board, and there's a lot of interesting work going on. But I'm hearing you speak and hearing region, hearing collaboration. I'm not hearing specific individual country borders. So the mindset seems to have shifted or be shifting towards that whole of continent approach. And so that in itself perhaps helps explain why Africa's voice is being heard. It's coherent or increasingly coherent. And now, having heard both of you, appears to be being backed up by practical action. So with that in mind, before we hand over back to Shannon for the questions, what key message would both of you like to leave the audience with? Perhaps with you, Moses, and then yourself, Ms. Zila.
Thank you, Aldo and Zila. I think for me, the key message is around taking the approach of the local value chain, because this is what looks at beyond just the mine, but it's looking at all the aspects that support that process, be it energy, infrastructure, and being able to bring all these actors together to find solutions to some of these challenges, including the regulatory one. The second one is that Africa should and must approach these things from the market lens. What does the market want? And how can we be able to address that so that we don't just keep our heads in the sand, but really be able to address what are the needs of the market and how can we produce this and align that with our aspirations. Obviously, we know that our singular aspiration is to maximally benefit from our minerals. And the way we are looking at that, obviously, is the mineral value addition. But it's also important that we understand how much minerals does Africa actually have. When we look at data that is on the continent, is either pre-colonial, and at that time, the assessments were looking for they're looking at gold or the PGM and all the things. How can we support our countries to actually take the first step to be able to explore our minerals, at least carry out geological surveys? And I just wanted to end by saying Mozilla made a very fundamental point, and I think this is one of the key objectives of MSG, resource sharing, and joint investment opportunities. How do we use the comparative advantage that one African country has in a particular mineral or mineral value chain, whether it's beneficiation, to leverage that? And we've seen examples of this working in different, we have the East African crude oil pipeline that's brought countries together. We have the Lobido corridor. So it's possible, and we can leverage this by focusing on strategic interests rather than nationalism. Thank you.
So I think from my perspective, Aldo, I'd like to add one other lens to the market lens that Moses spoke about, and that is the investor lens from a provision of capital, because I think those are quite important, and one which I think there's an opportunity to influence as a continent, and they converge with the interest of country, I think, on what I call this platform of governance, and where I'm going with this is, part of the content of this conversation around traceability and responsible mining. And we need to approach responsible mining and traceability as in all participants in mining being accountable to traceability and responsible mining. It's not only for the operators, but I think for everyone who provides inputs and everyone who gets outputs and results from that. And one of the ones I'd like to emphasize is on the use of proceeds in terms of tax revenues earned from mining. Quite often, the mining industry is criticized for not delivering benefits to industry, but not often and not sufficiently is being spoken about. Even those proceeds that have been received by governments, what are they being spent on? And this is where there remains a huge gap and provides for, I think, at times unfair criticism to the mining industry that it's not providing to the benefit of local communities. But it is both the responsibility of mining sector, government, to ensure that the revenues generated from mining are appropriately and equitably shared amongst all who are affected by mining. and that those who earn revenues from that actually reinvest them appropriately. On the mining side, firstly, for the growth and sustainability of the industry, but on the part of government, I think for the support and sustainability of community. And there will always be opportunities for both government and private sector to work together. And I think the whole concept of responsible mining and traceability needs to be approached from that perspective, that it applies to all parties, not just the mining industry. And I think this is how we'll then be able to achieve the objectives and goals for the development of the continent.
Thank you very much, Moses. In the few minutes that are remaining, Shannon, happy to open for questions if Moses and Zilla are happy to do that. Over to you, Shannon.
Thanks very much, Aldo. I think you're probably better placed to do this than I am, but I'm happy to go ahead with them. I think I'll just start at the top. And the first question we got was from Lebogang, and they wanted to know, how can one be funded to operate a mining project which is focused on diamonds? What are the requirements for any collaboration across the continent? I'm not sure who would be able to take that answer.
I can hazard a response to that. I mean, at the end of the day, any funding is a function of what are the expected cash flows to be able to support the repayment of that. And, in the absence of equity funding, be it money out of your own pocket as the developer or the founder, or supportive shareholders, you will have to rely on third-party debt funding of some sort, which will look at, the predictability of your production, but more importantly, access to markets and what revenues you can generate out of that. That's pretty much, how you're able to secure funding. And also the nature of your operations to be able to provide that product into the market is also important in the inherent risk. So it's not a straightforward response, and it depends on the commodity. Ask the same question around copper. The first response is that easily you can raise funding for copper because it's the hot commodity right now. Prices are high, and there's lots of exploration that's taking place in copper. And so the whole value chain of copper is quite secure, and then with huge levels of confidence. And so raising capital for a copper project will be relatively easier.
Thanks, Mzila.
Maybe I could also
Moses?
just chip in a little bit on that. As I said, one of the key enablers is access to finance. We are cognizant that the risk involved in the mining sector, it makes it a bit sort of challenging for conventional financial institutions to actually be able to support. As Mozilla said, if your business case and the project is viable, it's possible to get partners that can be able to support that. But you have to do a little bit more work internally, and usually you have to make some investments to be able to de-risk. Most of the times you probably will get the kind of financing which requires you put in something and then your partners put in something. But there is funding, except that there's a lot of preparation that you need to do. Thank you.
Thanks. That is helpful. I hope that answers your question, Lebo. We've got two similar questions, one from Hassan and one from Wezi. And they're basically asking whether humans and host communities and the mining affected communities, how they fit into the value chain. Like Wezi says, responsibility, traceability, and blockchain are nice words, but they don't really address the engagement and community levels of mining activities. How will these be factored in at the start, do you think?
No, thank you. I think Mozilla alluded to the issue of traceability and responsible mining and sourcing, being that it has to involve everybody, all the players. And when we look at the pillars for which we are operating under, community engagement is a key one. And I must say, in most of our countries, as we speak, countries have put in place regulations and policies that insist on community development. So in every country now, you have to sign a community development agreement. But there's a key point that Zilla raised is how is the revenue generated for mining companies being invested? I'm happy to note that one of the things that we're working on as MSG, that's being led by the Republic of South Sudan, is to create and share experiences from around reinvestment of proceeds from mining into, say, key infrastructures for government rather than consumption, which goes into the budget. And if you look at Uganda, I did pass a policy that all the proceeds from minerals will be going to invest in infrastructure, not in consumption. So the issue is that it's sort of like when we talk of an ecosystem, it means the involvement of all the players, communities, regulators, operators, and just about everybody to make sure that they're part of this. So the issue is not, these are enablers, traceability, blockchain technology, these are enablers, but the actual actions have to be done by the countries based on the policy framework that has been established. And I'm happy to report that in all MSG countries, there's been a keen interest in ensuring that communities benefit from the minerals, because happy communities means happy investors and investment. Thank you.
So thanks. And to add to that, I would put a weighting of 100% to each of responsibility, traceability, and blockchain, because these are all quite critical in as far as how communities are involved and have an equitable share in the benefits that come out of mining, whether it's in direct opportunities or indirect. And I think the most important part of all of this comes with where economic opportunities are provided to community members. How do you ensure that they are not vulnerable to some unscrupulous players in community? And one of the important things I have seen and that has been shared with me in terms of blockchain technology is the ability for payments and traceability of payments to flow through and to be traced all the way to the end receiver and provider of that service provider. Now, where mining often takes place is in, what you could call God-forsaken places, because that's where the ore body is. And when you have communities developing that participate in the value chain or in other associated economic opportunities, it's very simple technology which is used through blockchain, where to the extent that a woman-owned business or a youth-owned or community-owned business generate revenue, the players in that value chain on this blockchain are able to, with 100% confidence, participate in that economic activity and ensure that individuals at the ground level who need to receive revenue of that receive that money in a way that is secure and can be traceable throughout the whole value chain, and does not provide for unscrupulous individuals, as we've seen in many instances, to intercept and accept that and deprive communities. And this is something that has been employed in other mining communities, but in also other industries, which can be easily adaptable for the mining industry value chain.
Thanks, Mzila. Thanks, Moses. Another question that came through on the chat now focuses more on critical minerals. And Lloyd is asking, in light of the globally accepted understanding that the definition of critical minerals is based on end user utility, why do stakeholders remain so focused on defining these minerals? What would your answer be to that one?
Well, it's a very interesting one, and usually the definition of something also determines the attention paid to it, as well as the flow of investment and money. Okay, because when you look at the evolving nature of the definition of critical minerals in Australia and I think New Zealand, they have added coal. Okay, and in Africa, we are saying without phosphates, for example, or fertilizer, we are not going to achieve food security, even if we have our, fairly fertile lands. So at a global policy level, the definition of something is what determines where resources flow to. So what we are trying to say in Africa is, yes, we are happy with the current sort of critical minerals. And if you look at different jurisdictions, for instance, the US has 34 minerals that they believe are essential, okay, for their national interests. Africa doesn't have that to say we only keep taking on what we know, which are battery or energy transition minerals. So what we are saying is, yes, we have the minerals that you need, but we need to expand this conversation so we include the things that Africa needs. And this is something that Aldo was talking about, from rule takers to rule shapers. So the idea is that as supplier countries, we should have a say on what we believe is critical based on our realities. So we could have a generally globally accepted, but then we should also be. So the issue is not focusing. The issue is what is defined globally is where the resources and investment goes.
Yeah.
I believe Mozilla has something else to add.
Yeah, I think in addition to that, when we studied the definitions of the global north countries, these definitions are driven by, firstly, their own outlook of the economic growth plans. They've been driven by the pace of that economic development, and as well as the technology inputs to support that technology, and where the inputs for that technology will come from. And I think more importantly then was the consideration of, well, there's likely to be a supply gap between where they want to be, and where the world is, and the pace at which the world is supplying these minerals. And this is where the concept of, critical mineral supply chain risk came from. And that's what has been driving a lot of this conversation on critical minerals, and hence the scramble. And also, if you look at the Paris Agreement and the need to achieve the Paris goals of not breaching 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050, which unfortunately seems like we have lost that battle. The urgency of achieving that goal and the technologies required to achieve that means that there's a level of criticality and I guess urgency with ensuring that we're able to produce these minerals as quickly as they needed to, and for that technology to develop to be able to achieve those goals. Now, from a supply side perspective, coming back to what Moses was saying, frankly, from an African perspective, all minerals are critical, because they, in the first instance, play a very important role of providing for development. Going back to the conversation around the voice of Africa and where it's coming from and what it's driving, all minerals need to play a role different to what they've played before in terms of meeting the development needs of the continent, at the same time enabling a transition in terms of energy and technology as well.
Maybe on that note, Shannon, if I may, having had a look at some of the questions also, just summarize or compile some of those questions with this point. The people listening, particularly, I suspect those from the African continent, are seeking a degree of clarity in terms of Will it be different this time in terms of tapping into mineral wealth and achieving development? If I may just say a couple of sentences on behalf of the FMF, and then we sort of close off with yourselves. That one of the objectives of the Future Minerals Forum is to enable the creation of resilient and responsible value chains across Africa, but what we also call Western Asia and Central Asia, so that's what is regarded as a super region. But more recently, we're expanding that to all supplier countries, so that by producing responsibly, driving the necessary investments, and ensuring enough value or adequate value is generated locally, that many of these countries can get onto the developmental path in a sustainable, ongoing way. And so by doing so, we overcome past notions of resource curses and digging up and ship out of raw materials. I suspect we're in a different space now. The conversations we're having at the Future Minerals Forum are very clear around that point, and that this is about development and providing prosperity to supplier regions for them to work together, because no single country can achieve this on their own, and that Africa is stepping forward, and the work that the organizations such as Moses and Mzila's are at the leading edge of that. On that kind of positive note, from my side, I'd like to hand back to Moses and Mzila for just final remarks. I'm mindful we're over time, and apologies for that, Shannon. But final quick remarks from either of you.
Thank you, Aldo. And I believe that the issue of funding is always going to be a challenge, and whether it's governments or private sector. And this is one of the reasons we are trying to leverage some of the existing landscape around things like the African Mineral Token and also tokenization of African minerals. We believe that these are some of the ways we can tap into global financial markets to be able to attract financing that would then help us to do mineral exploration, put in place critical infrastructure, value addition, as well as that. I also want to encourage our viewers, both our countries and private sector, to join the Africa Responsible Mineral Sourcing Initiative, because, as I said, it's important that we address the issues of conflict minerals because of the conflict-affected areas and the high-risk rating, the issue of environment, and the issue of labor and human rights, to say. Finally, I would like to extend an invitation to everyone to join us to continue this conversation in person in July in Uganda, when we're doing the first Future Minerals Forum Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Moses. Zila.
Elder, I mean, I think to your question around, is it different this time? My response is that it has to. And because, you know, the way I'm taking on this opportunity and less a challenge is that it's a huge leadership opportunity that we're faced with, and it is a leadership challenge that we have both across business and public sector to ensure that we get the development and that we enable the transition of the continent. And I think the message is coming through clearly that leadership has to take this on. If you look at the shift that is taking place in political leadership as a result of the elections that take place. And so that's a backdrop that we cannot ignore in the private sector as well, that there's a huge call for action and a huge call for change. The second reason is that we haven't seen a huge flood of capital from the investment community, given that we all have bought into this imperative to transition, and we have to ask why. And my response to the question of why is that I think there's still a lot of work that we have to do as supply side countries to provide for a context for where capital feels that it's safe, it can generate a return, and that those returns will not only be financial, but they'll also be across social environment, capital returns as well. And so there's a lot of work that I think leadership across both private and public sector has to do to begin to see the kind of investment and fulfilling of the expectations from society.
Thank you, Mzila. On that note, we will wrap up the webinar. Very interesting conversation. It's an ongoing discussion, as you've heard. There's much going on. You're welcome to join us in Uganda in July, and beyond that in Riyadh in January for the Future Minerals Forum conversations, where you'll see this type of discussion happening on a much grander scale. So we look forward to having you there. Back to you, Shannon. And thank you very much, obviously, to Moses and Mzila for a very interesting and informative conversation. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, and thanks for all the questions.
Thanks,
Thank
Aldo.
you.
And that brings us to the end of the webinar. Our thanks go to facilitator Aldo Panini for an engaging discussion on the Future Minerals Forum and the Africa Minerals Strategy Group. Thank you also to our panelists, His Excellency Moses Ngadu from the African Minerals Strategy Group and Mzila Mthenjane from the Minerals Council South Africa. A big thank you to our partner, Future Minerals Forum, for making this webinar possible. And finally, thank you to the attendees for taking the time to join us for this session. We hope you enjoyed it. The recording of today's webinar will be sent to you soon. And if you have any additional questions, please be in touch. You can reach us at shannon@creamermedia.co.za. Thanks so much for your time and goodbye.